Rockology Show, Chris and Matt, and on our phone line, Vivian Campbell, guitar player for Def Leppard, and his new band, The Last in Line. And Vivian, I kind of wanted to ask you, did this really all start when you were playing with Thin Lizzy and you just kind of had the urge to plug that guitar in and go back to your roots, which was the first two Dio albums? Is that really how this whole thing all began, the new band, The Last in Line?
Yeah, I mean, it all happened by accident. There were a few different things that were going on. In late 2010, early 2011, Scott Gorham called me. Def Leppard were inactive at that time, and Scott asked if he could borrow me as a stunt guitar player for a European tour. So I absolutely jumped at the chance, because Lizzy were such an influential band for me when I was in my formative years, in my mid-teens, when I was really learning how to play guitar and really honing my style, and the music of Thin Lizzy was massively influential to me, and it was so riff oriented, it was such iconic rock music, and the twin guitar harmonies. So my first band, Sweet Savage, actually we got to open for Thin Lizzy a lot back in Ireland and across the UK when I was in my later teens, like 18 and 19. And so I really got to see them up close, and I got to kind of know the guys, and Phil Lynott was a huge hero of mine, and a great songwriter, and just a very charismatic frontman, a true rock star, But anyway, the guitar players of Lizzy, Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson from the classic Lizzy lineup, and were very influential to me. And in particular, it was through Thin Lizzy that I discovered Gary Moore, who was my ultimate guitar hero, and I think a guitar player that influenced me more than anyone else. So just to be on stage with Scott Gorham and Brian Downey, the original Lizzy drummer, and playing the songs of my youth, playing Emerald and Jailbreak and playing Black Rose, and it took me back to being 16 and 17 again, and really living my life for guitar. At that time in my life, guitar was everything to me. It was 100%, and as you get older and it becomes a job, you kind of, that passion doesn't always burn as brightly, and I really kind of reconnected. That was the main thing. And also, around that time, also when I was on tour in the UK, I think it was 2011, we did some shows with Steel Panther. And I got to meet those guys, and they're just really, really funny guys and tremendous musicians. And they had a residency going at the House of Blues in Los Angeles, and I live in LA. So they said after the tour, if you ever want to come to the House of Blues, we said, we're mad Dio fans. Let's get up and play Rainbow in the Dark and Holy Diver and whatnot. And so I ended up doing that on several occasions after that tour. So this was all around the same kind of time. So I was really starting to reconnect with my initial passion in life, which was throttling the shit out of a Gibson Les Paul, and my original music, my early career, the early Dio records. So I came off the Lizzy tour. I was just stoked about playing guitar again. I wanted to play more rock music. I wanted to play lead guitar again, and I called Jimmy Payne, I called Vinny Appice. We'd always remained close. We were always good friends, and I asked them if they wanted to jam. So we literally just built the rehearsal room. We went in for a couple hours in the afternoon, and it had been 27 years since we had played together, and it could have been 27 minutes because the chemistry was absolutely immediate, and just like it was the first time we ever played together. So we all got really excited about it, and we played for a couple hours, and Vinny said, it'd be so much better if we had a singer to complete this. He says, I know this young guy, Andy Freeman. He lives close by. Let me see if he can come down. So Vinny called up Andy. Andy comes in. And when I heard Andy sing the song, that's when I decided, this is great. We should go out and do some shows, just playing the early records. I mean, playing the songs from the first three Dio records. Andy is a very powerful singer, like Ronnie was, but he doesn't have the tonality that Ronnie did. He sounds totally different. And if he had sounded like Ronnie, it would have been kind of creepy, to be honest, and it would have been something that would never have left that rehearsal room. But the fact that Andy came in and had a whole different tonality to his voice, but yet he was powerful enough to sing on top of the racket that Jimmy and Vinny and I make. Because when Jimmy and Vinny and I play, it's the unmistakable sound of the early Dio records. But here you had a singer who took it in a different direction, was powerful, but had a different sound to him. So it kind of sounded interesting to me. I thought this is, something that's worth pursuing. Plus, at this stage, it had been over a year or so since Ronnie had passed away. So the Dio band in whatever incarnation no longer existed. And if Ronnie were still alive and he were still out performing as Dio, I don't think I would have done it, because I wouldn't have wanted that conflict that would have been inevitable. So it seemed right, you know, and without giving it any thought, I said, let's just go out and play some shows, and let's call it Last in Line. It just seemed appropriate because, you know, Vinny and Jimmy and I had written and recorded Last in Line with Ronnie, and Ronnie had passed away, and we were now the last in line, so it just seems like an appropriate name for it. So it just grew from that, and we started doing some shows, and a year or two later, we were offered shows in the UK. We went and did that. We were offered the Loud Park Festival in Japan, and it was basically after that in the very end of 2013, when we got back from Japan, Frontiers Records got in touch with us and
so let's
asked
make
if
a
we'd
record,
be interested in writing and recording a new album. And up to that point, to be honest, we hadn't thought of it. You know, we all have day jobs and other commitments, and it was just kind of very slowly moving along. It was just a fun little weekend project, but with our writing and recording the Heavy Crown album, that really kind of takes it to a different level. You know, now it is an actual band, and we're out here. We're in Seattle tonight. We're going to play the start of the tour, and we're trying to feature as many new songs as possible, as well as, you know, the obvious classic Dio hits, you know, that we're going to play. So it's great fun, and it's lovely to play this kind of music again, and to, like I said, to reconnect with my inner teenager.
Well, how important, Vivian, is it? Like, because you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, which I always thought was important to bands, and I was talking to my brother about this, the chemistry in the band. And once band members leave and they go on to do something else, that chemistry is pretty much gone. And then when you, like you said, 27 years had passed before the three of you ever got together again, and it was like no time had passed at all. I mean, how important is that, being in a band? I mean, because obviously you see lineup changes here and there. I mean, it obviously happened with Thin Lizzy, one of your favorite bands, when they brought in Snowy White to replace Gary Moore, and Gary Moore replaced Brian Robertson, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But I mean, how important is it for the chemistry? I mean, do fans really care about that?
I think it's vital, personally. I don't think you can ever replace any musician. It doesn't matter if it's a drummer or a singer or a bass player or a guitar player. We're all unique, you know. We all have our unique sound, just like we have a unique fingerprint. And it's the notes you play, the notes that you don't play, the phrasing, the level of attack, the aggression in your playing or lack of it. You know, everyone plays different. You know, when Vinny was no longer playing with Ronnie, I thought the sound of the Dio band was totally gone, because Vinny is such a unique drummer. He is the hardest hitting drummer I've ever played with, and I've played with a shitload of great drummers. But, you know, there is a chemistry that people have, you know, and there's a unique sound to the early Dio records, and a lot of people listen to our new album, to the Heavy Crown album, and they say, oh, it sounds a bit like Dio. Well, it sounds a bit like Dio because it was Jimmy Bain and Vinny Appice and myself. It was 75% of the original Dio band, and we do have that sound, and it wasn't something that we're deliberately trying to do. It just happens to be the sound that we make. So I do think that that's vital, you know, and we were... You know, it was so unfortunate, you know, Jimmy's passing. He passed away late January of this year, and the album came out a month later. And we had a tour booked. We canceled the tour. And then, you know, we took a bit of time and we buried Jimmy and we licked our wounds, and we decided that we owed it to ourselves and we owed it to Jimmy to pick up the pieces and carry on. And we couldn't have gotten a better person to fill that gap than Phil Suzanne. You know, he's cut from the same cloth, played the same kind of music in the same era with Ozzy Osbourne, and his style is as close to Jimmy as we're ever going to get. It's never going to be Jimmy, you know, and we're not trying to do that, but it's the best that we can have at the stage without Jimmy. And, you know, but the chemistry will never be quite the same without Jimmy Bain. I'd be the first to admit that. I think when you take anyone out of the equation, it changes. I'm not saying it's better or it's worse, but it's always going to be different.
Well, yeah, there's always going to be times that the sound is okay, but sometimes fans just drift away and realize it's not the same anymore. But you're also in Def Leppard. You've been with them since '92. How does this band, the work process, differ from what you're doing in Def Leppard? I mean, I can imagine the scale for Def Leppard is a lot higher. This is more like you said, like, hey, I got together with my old bandmates. This is what's happening right now. I got some downtime from Def Leppard. How do you approach the two bands? I mean, you're pretty much in two different bands right now.
Yeah, well, they're entirely different disciplines. I mean, Def Leppard is very, very much about song structure. It's very much about production in the studio. It's a very slick machine, and it's a very, very, very vocal-intensive band. The challenge for me in Def Leppard has always been more so about the vocal. I've become so much stronger as a singer in the last almost 25 years that I've been with Def Leppard. The challenge for me in Last in Line is not singing. I don't even sing in Last in Line. I refuse to sing in this band. I just play guitar. I put my head down and I play guitar very aggressively. That's what the challenge is. So they're two very, very different things for me. You know, when Leppard goes into the studio to make songs, we really take our time. We really focus on the minutia and really go into details about what kind of song we need, how we're going to approach it, where it fits on the record. Is it appropriate for the record at that time or that band at that time? Whereas with Last in Line, when we were writing the Heavy Crown album, we went into a rehearsal room and we just said, anyone got a riff? And I would have a riff or Jimmy would have a riff and we'd play it, and within a couple of hours we'd have a song. And if Jimmy and I didn't have a riff, Vinny would just lay down a monster groove, and he's such an inspiring drummer. I've always been inspired by the way Vinny Appice plays drums, and when Vinny just plays, I pretty much automatically can find something to play on top of it, and we just kind of kick it around, and we don't spend a lot of time. It's not a thoughtful process, you know, at all. So in that way, it's at the other end of the spectrum creatively from how Def Leppard approach making records. And again, there's no right or no wrong. They're just two very, very different approaches, you know. The music in Last in Line is very simple. It's very organic. It's just nuts and bolts, you know. Def Leppard's music is much, much more complex and much more thought out.
Well, I was going to sit there and say, because if you go back to listening to the music from the 90s to the 80s to the 70s to the 60s, back in the 70s and into the early 80s, a lot of the bands were on record contracts. They had to go into the studio every year, put out an album, and there wasn't any time to really think about what you're writing. It was just get into the studio, and just like you said, who's got a riff, who's got something that we could put something together for. And I think that's why the 70s and parts of the 80s as well, there's a lot of creativity and a lot of unique sounds coming out of there. And I guess I'll ask this question. When you have too much time to think about what you're writing and what you're working on, do you think it takes away from the music? Or because when I listen to the Last in Line album, it sounds very organic and it flows to me, and it sounds like it's got that vibe of just going into the studio and jamming.
That's what it is, yeah. I mean, you know, different people have different opinions on that. I remember there was a quote from Sting that I read decades ago about songwriting, where he said that if left to his devices, he'd probably spend his entire life in the studio finishing a song, you know. But you kind of have to, at some point or other, say, okay, you know, this turkey's cooked, you know. So with Last in Line, we didn't have the luxury of any time, even if we wanted it. Our budget was so minuscule. And our commitments, you know, we're so scattered. Like I said, we all have different commitments to our day jobs, and we get together sporadically, and we literally just have 3 or 4 days to write a few songs and to record them, and that's what we did, you know. So we didn't have the luxury of time to reflect upon it. You know, that it's very different for Def Leppard. Leppard is a much, much more focused thing. In Def Leppard, you know, we talk more about the concept of the kind of record we want to make, usually before we actually write it. You know, people do bring songs, you know, we're always continually coming up with song ideas, and we'll play them to each other as we go along, but frequently it's more of a concept that's proposed before the album is actually written, and that's certainly not the case with Last in Line. We just kind of, whatever comes out is what comes out, you know.
Well, I was going to ask. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the Def Leppard, because I know you guys went in some different directions on a couple albums, and I know some of the fans out there didn't embrace it. So, would you say with Leppard, there's, like you said, that formula or that style that you go into the studio that the fans are expecting you guys to do? Would you say that at times that probably hinders you guys from doing some different stuff, maybe with Leppard?
Well, see, Leppard has grown creatively in the decades that the band has been in existence. its origins were obviously as a hard rock band, but by Pyromania in 1983, that had started to kind of evolve into something else. I think when Def Leppard really partnered with Mutt Lange, I think Mutt really kind of instilled in the band a more diverse, creative approach. So I would say from Pyromania onwards, Def Leppard definitely became more than just a hard rock band. There's a great hard rock element within Def Leppard. I mean, we can certainly play rock, but yet we've gone to different genres, and we've dipped our toes in many, many different genres throughout the years. So now it's kind of difficult to put your finger on it and say that Def Leppard is specifically this, that, or the other. If it had to be one thing, it's definitely a rock band. I mean, no matter what we play, especially when we play it in the live arena, Def Leppard's a pretty forceful band. I mean, we don't pussyfoot around. We leave a big, heavy footprint behind us, but we do have the artistic ambition within the band, and we're fortunate enough that we have, I think, the diversity and the talent within the framework of Def Leppard to carry out all these different styles and do a certain amount of justice to it.
No, I mean, I agree. I've seen you guys play live, and you guys put on a phenomenal show. It's just my frustration as a music fan. I like to hear the new music that's coming out, and I like the new Def Leppard music, the Sparkle Lounge. I thought was a phenomenal album. I guess my frustration is a lot of the fans out there aren't embracing the new material, and I guess maybe that's the direction I was going with the question.
Well, I think that's more a reflection on the state of the industry than the fan base. The whole structure of the music industry has changed radically with the advent of the internet. So, how people are exposed to music and how people consume music is entirely different from what it was like 20 years ago. So it's that in itself, I think, is the greater driving factor behind all of that.
So Vivian, do you really think like what you just said, like the way the music industry has changed, do you think it's even necessary for certain bands anymore to even make a record if no one's really going to buy it sometimes? I mean, we get a lot of records every year for our station. We listen to a lot of different music. Bands continue to put out albums. I like that. I always have. I like the CDs. I don't like the digital stuff. But I mean, that's more old school. And then with vinyl coming back, I mean, is there really like... Is the industry changing back to the way it was, or do you personally think that it's never going to be the way it was in the 70s, 80s, and even parts of the 90s?
No, I don't think it'll ever come back. I don't think music itself is as important as it used to be. I think there's far too much competing for people's attention nowadays. We live in a niche world where people only go to what it is that really appeals to them. In the past, you didn't have... before cable television, you kind of had to watch the networks, and then cable came along, and that really kind of scattered that. With music, it used to be terrestrial radio, and then the internet comes along, and there's gajillions of internet stations and whatnot. So people's attention is pulled in so many different directions, and music has been devalued a lot through piracy. I'm not whinging or complaining about that so much. I wish it wasn't the case, but there are upsides to it as well. So you got to kind of take it as it is. But I think one of the, aside from the economic effect it's had on musicians, I think it's devalued music in the eyes and the ears of people who consume it. I just don't think music is as important to the younger generations as it was to me and my generation when we were growing up. We really had to invest in music. If I heard something on the radio or read about something in Sounds or the New Musical Express or Melody Maker or one of the other weekly or monthly publications where I grew up, I would have to go and hunt it out. I would have to go on a Saturday afternoon when I was out of school, take a bus, go into Belfast, go to the music shop, ask behind the counter, do you have this? Have them drop the needle on the record, listen to a couple of tracks, look at the artwork, read the liner notes on the back, find out who's involved, who wrote it, who produced it, where it was recorded, and then make a decision to spend my small allowance of money on a record, So you really invested in it. It was kind of like a religion, you owned it. It was part of your identity. I don't think that this generation growing up now in their teens thinks of music the same way. It's something dispensable. It's something in the background. It's something behind a video game or a TV commercial or in a movie or a TV show. It's ephemeral. It comes and goes. It's like in the ether. It's not something tangible. And that's further exacerbated by the fact that there's no physical product, that you don't hold something in your hand and look at it while you're listening to it. You don't look at the liner notes anymore. You don't even know that this generation they hear something and they may like it or not like it. But even if they like it, they don't really know anything about it.
Well, yeah,
it just kind of passes over them.
Exactly.
So I don't think that's going to change, unfortunately. That is what it is. I just don't think music is as important, and that's why I don't think there's so many people playing guitar or anything anymore,
I wanted to ask you this because you worked with a lot of different singers. You worked with David Coverdale of Whitesnake, obviously the late Ronnie James Dio, Lou Gramm of Foreigner, and now Joe Elliott of Def Leppard. How do these singers, you've worked with all four of them, do they approach everything differently, or is there some kind of formula that they all go through to, make the song sound its best, or their personalities? You worked with some of the best singers in the industry in hard rock and heavy metal. Can you tell any stories about any of them?
Well, you forgot to mention one who's probably one of the best is Rob Lamont from Riverdogs.
Okay. Well, I didn't want.
Which always kind of pains me because Rob is one of the most talented people I've ever worked with, and yet nobody seems to know who he is. But that's life in the music business. It doesn't always, lead to fame and fortune. Obviously, the singer is the focal point in any group, and it's a lot of pressure. I wouldn't want to be the singer in a band. I'm happy to be able to sing, and I really enjoy it, and that's one of the things I really, truly enjoy about being in Def Leppard. I find it very cathartic to get out there and sing, but I wouldn't want to be the lead singer. It's a lot of pressure. And I would say that all those singers you mentioned had certain strong characteristics. Ronnie was bulletproof. In all the shows I ever did with Ronnie, he only didn't sound like Ronnie one night, and it was at the Southampton Guildhall in England in the middle of winter, I think on the Holy Diver tour, and Ronnie had a horrible flu. And the fact that he could sing at all was amazing, but it was the only night that I ever stood up stage and thought, wow, Ronnie doesn't sound good tonight, because every other night he was just amazing. He had a certain strength and a stamina to his voice that other singers didn't. And most singers don't, to be honest, And then other singers are really more lyrically focused. Like I think Rob Lamont from Riverdogs is an incredible lyricist, as well as just being able to sing the phone book. He's that good, In fact, it's so easy for someone like Rob that when I was working with him, I want him to push himself more, and explore the outer limits of his vocal range, because he finds it so easy, I think, So, but yeah, they're all, I've been really, really fortunate. I've worked with a lot of really, really talented musicians, and especially talented singers, and I've learned something from all of them, and they've all encouraged me in different ways. David Coverdale really, really encouraged me to learn how to sing, and really taught me a lot in the brief time that I was with Whitesnake, and I'm thankful to him for that. So, I've learned something from all of them.
Now, I got a question to ask you, because you're a guitar player, you're a guest guitar in some songs, and one of the bands I liked, and one of the albums I was a big fan of, was Goddard's first album, and there was a track you played on there called Fire Dance that I wanted to ask you about, because that was one of the standout tracks on there. And then when I went through the liner notes, I noticed that you played the lead guitar in that particular track. So from my perspective, I guess I want to ask, what's it like going into a studio when a song's already written and you're a guest guitar player? What's involved with that? And that track particularly, what was involved with that particular track? Because it's got a good lead.
I don't even remember that. I remember doing it years and years ago. I have no recollection of the song whatsoever, or the solo. It's strange. To go in, and I didn't even know the guys. I knew the producer, and I didn't even know him terribly well, but he was a friend of a friend. So they kind of asked, hey, would you mind to come down and do a guitar solo? I said, yeah, sure, why not? I'm not doing anything that day. So you go in, you meet the band for the first time, you hear the track for the first time, and it's a lot of pressure, to be honest. I've never enjoyed going through the creative process with an audience. Performing in front of an audience is different, because you know what you're doing then, theoretically. Not always, but most of the time. But when I'm in the studio, when I'm doing guitar solos, when I'm trying to come up with something that's got structure to it, that's got melody to it and phrasing, it's always more difficult for me to do that in front of an audience. And even if it's just an audience of 2, 3, or 4 people, but especially if you don't know them, you know. So that was a little bit weird for me. I have no idea how that solo came out, to be honest. I don't think I ever heard the track after I left the studio that day, but I'm glad that somebody likes it.
I mean, it was like
encouraging.
it was one of those tracks where I just thought the guitar solo was phenomenal in there. And let's go back to, I guess, was it Rainbow in the Dark? Was that the first track you laid down with Dio when you went into the studio?
That is the very first solo we did on the Holy Diver album, yeah. And that's also the first take. It was downhill from there.
I mean, but
I'd been like, it was, you know, the night before we did that, we wrapped up, and Ronnie said, "Okay," he came over to me and said, "Okay, Viv, tomorrow night we'll start the first solo. Which one do you want to do?" And I thought, geez, okay, let's do Rainbow in the Dark. So. Back in those days, I give no thought at all to being prepared in terms of actually mapping out a solo. And all I knew was that the song was in A minor. So I went in early the afternoon the next day. I used to smoke back then, and I still drink a lot of coffee. So I'd be smoking Marlboro and drinking coffee all day and playing in A minor. And what I should have been doing was mapping out a solo, but I was just playing an A minor. I was just playing all my licks. Just, okay, that's a little cool A minor lick. I'll do this one, I'll do that one. But I had no structure to it. So I had no idea what I was doing. And then the evening came around. We got a guitar signed up. Ronnie said, okay, well, let's try one. So they rolled the tape, because back then it was taped, 2-inch. And the solo on the record is the very first one I did. And so we did it, and the solo finished, and the track stopped, and Ronnie went, wow. He said, that was fucking amazing. He said, do you want to try another one? And I said, okay, yeah, sure. So now that I've done that one, I'm thinking, well, I can't play the same stuff. I got to play something totally different. So I started thinking about it. And it was like, yeah, okay. So we did the second one, and Ronnie goes, yeah, let's just keep the first one. So that was it. So it wasn't until years later that I decided that never again would I go in to play a guitar solo completely unprepared. You know, that sometimes it works great, sometimes it yielded great results, and then other times, usually more often than not, you know, it ended poorly. So one of life's lessons for a guitar player, you know.